sister insulted my husband at my own wedding and spent her life thinking that all I have should have been hers. But her own greed brought her down. My sister Camille decided a long time ago that good things were meant for her and not for me. We grew up in the same house with the same parents, but she moved through life like she had been promised something the rest of us had not. And any success that came my way was evidence that the universe had made a clerical error. When I got a scholarship, she said the school was being charitable. When I landed my first real job, she said anyone could have gotten it. So when I married Julian, who was wealthy and kind and easy to look at, Camille could not stand it, because in her mind that life had always been reserved for her. She did not bother hiding it. At my engagement dinner, she told the table that Julian had clearly lowered his standards, and that a man with his money usually ended up with someone more impressive. She smiled when she said it so everyone could decide it was a joke. At the wedding, she cornered Julian near the bar and told him it was not too late to trade up. When he walked away, she found me and said he was probably just being polite to the bride's family. For the first 2 years of my marriage, Camille treated my home like a store she had a standing account at. She borrowed jewelry and kept it. She asked Julian for loans she never mentioned repaying, and got offended when I brought it up. When Julian gave her a generous birthday gift, she complained to our mother that a man with more taste would have done better. She told relatives I had gotten lucky, that I did not fit Julian's world, and that she would have known how to properly enjoy his money. Through all of it, she maintained a boyfriend named Sam, a quiet, steady man who adored her, fixed her car, drove 2 hours to bring her soup when she was sick, and asked her to marry him twice. Camille kept Sam around only as long as he was useful, certain she would replace him the moment something better appeared. She told me more than once that Sam was just for now, that she was holding out for someone on Julian's level, and that she refused to settle the way she believed I had. The more she talked, the clearer her weakness became. Camille could not turn down a richer option no matter what it cost her, because she genuinely believed wealth was owed to her, and that any wealthy man would obviously choose her if given the chance. So I gave her a richer option to chase. Julian had a best friend named Theo, who was real, who was even wealthier than Julian, and who had just ended a long relationship. None of that was a secret. What I did was talk about Theo in front of Camille, warmly and often. I mentioned he was coming to stay at our lake house for the whole summer. I mentioned he was finally looking to settle down. I mentioned how handsome he was, and how much his family had, and then I let my sister's imagination do the rest. I never said Theo wanted to meet her. I never told her he had asked about her. I only ever spoke about a single, wealthy, available man within reach, and Camille heard exactly what her greed wanted to hear. She moved fast, the way I knew she would. She broke up with Sam over the phone, telling him she had outgrown him, and that he should be grateful for the time she had given him. She quit her steady job so she could spend the summer at the lake. She put a designer wardrobe on 3 credit cards so she would look like she belonged in Theo's world. She told the whole family she was about to be engaged to a man who made Julian look ordinary, and that they would finally see what she had always deserved. She arrived at the lake house with 4 suitcases and a plan, threw herself at Theo from the first evening, laughed too hard at everything he said, touched his arm, talked about the future like it was already decided. Theo, who was polite but not foolish, saw exactly what she was within a week. He was kind to her because he was kind to everyone, and that kindness was the only signal she heard. By the end of the month, his ex had come back into the picture, and he left the lake house early to be with the woman he actually loved, thanking us for the visit and barely remembering my sister's name. Camille had quit her job for a summer that was over. She had maxed 3 cards on clothes she had nowhere to wear, and she had thrown away the one person who had ever truly wanted her, because she was certain something better was owed to her. She came to me furious, demanding to know why I had dangled Theo in front of her, and I reminded her that I had never said a single word about Theo wanting her, that I had only mentioned my husband's friend was visiting, and that she had decided all the rest herself. She had no answer because all of it was true. Sam, meanwhile, did just fine. Within the year, he was with a woman who actually saw what he was worth, and the last I heard, he was engaged to her. The quiet, decent life Camille threw away now belonging to someone who was grateful for it. Camille tried to come back to Sam once the credit card bills arrived, and he gently told her he had moved on, which she genuinely could not understand, because she still believed he should have waited for her no matter how long it took. She did not go quiet after that. She went to our mother. Within a week, Salome was calling me, saying I had been cruel, saying Camille was in debt and alone, and that family was supposed to help. I knew exactly what Camille had told her and exactly what she had left out, so I started saving everything. Every text, every voicemail, every message where Camille had said exactly what she thought of me, Julian, and Sam. If Salome wanted to pick a side, I was going to make sure she had the full picture first. Salome called on a Tuesday morning while I was at the counter pouring coffee. She said Camille was on her couch, that she cried every night, that she barely ate, and that I needed to call Camille that day and apologize. Something inside me twisted a little because the picture she was painting was hard to hear. Camille on the couch, not eating, crying every night. That was still my sister. We had grown up sharing a bedroom. I knew what she sounded like when she cried for real. I was nearly ready to say I would call when Julian walked in from the hall. He took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I told told him everything Salome had just said. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, his expression did not soften the way I expected. He reminded me what Camille had said at the engagement dinner and at the wedding. He reminded me about the jewelry, the loans, the things she had told our relatives about him. He was not being cruel. He was being clear. Everything Camille had lost, she had thrown away herself. Nobody made her quit her job. Nobody made her max those cards. Nobody made her dump Sam over the phone like he was nothing. She did all of that because she saw a chance at a richer man and grabbed for it without thinking twice. Still, I sent Camille a short text that afternoon. I told her I hoped we could move forward and that I did not want things to stay the way they were. She responded in under 4 minutes. It was not a thank you. It was not an apology. It was a list. She said Julian needed to pay off all 3 of her credit cards. She said I owed her a public apology in front of the entire family. She said I needed to admit out loud to everyone that I had deliberately set her up with Theo, knowing he would reject her, just to humiliate her. That was her idea of moving forward. Not a conversation, not a fresh start, a payment plan and a public confession. I brought the phone to Julian. He read it once, then again, slower. Then he set it down and said, "She is not sorry. She is negotiating." That was the moment it clicked. Camille was not sitting on Salome's couch grieving because she had lost her sister, or because she felt guilty about the way she had treated people. She was figuring out how to come out of this with a profit. The tears, the not eating, the whole performance for our mother. It was not pain. It was strategy. Around 8 that evening, Salome called again. This time her voice was completely different. The tears were gone. She sounded cold and rehearsed, and she told me that if I did not help Camille with those debts and apologize in front of the family, she would make sure every relative knew exactly what I had done. She would tell them I set Camille up on purpose, that I had used that man to destroy her life because I was jealous of her. I sat on the edge of the bed and let those words land. This was not my mother being worried about her daughter anymore. This was a threat, and it did not sound like Salome. It sounded like Camille. The words, the framing, the specific details she chose to include, all of it had her fingerprints on it. Camille had not just been crying on that couch for a week. She had been working. She had been sitting next to our mother every single day, feeding her a version of events where I was the villain and Camille was the victim. And she had done it so carefully that by the time Salome called me that morning, she believed every word. My sister had turned our own mother into a weapon and was pointing her right at me. Julian was at the door when I hung up. I told him what Salome had said, every word. He nodded slowly and said, "Then we get ready." The next morning, I sat down at the dining room table with my laptop and phone and started going through 3 years of Camille's texts, screenshotting everything that mattered and printing it in order. I went oldest to newest because I wanted anyone who read them to see the pattern the way I had lived it. First, the ones from after the engagement, where she told me Julian was settling and that girls like us did not end up with men like him. Then the messages from around the wedding, where she said Julian had looked uncomfortable at the altar and wondered aloud if he was having second thoughts. Then the ones from my first year of marriage, where she asked Julian for money 3 separate times, and when I brought it up, told me I was being cheap with someone else's wallet. I printed her texts about Sam too, the ones where she called him a placeholder and said she was just keeping him warm until someone better appeared, the one where she bragged about turning down his proposals because he was not worth a face-to-face conversation, and finally the messages from after the lake house, demanding Julian pay off all 3 cards and that I apologize publicly in front of the whole family. Julian sat across from me while I organized everything and started marking the pages, writing small notes in the margins about what had happened in the days around each message, so nobody could say I was pulling anything out of context. By the end of the afternoon, we had a clean timeline. Camille's own words told the whole story without me having to explain a single thing. 3 days later, my cousin Darla called. Darla and I had always been close, one of the few people in our family who did not simply accept what she was told at face value. She said Camille had been calling relatives one by one and telling each of them a different version of what happened. To one aunt, Camille said I had encouraged her relationship with Theo and then pulled him away on purpose once she got attached. To another relative, she said Julian had laughed at her when she asked him politely for a small loan. To our uncle, she said the worst one, that I had kicked her out of the lake house in the middle of the night with nowhere to go. She is telling everyone a different story, Darla said, and none of them match. I sat with that for a minute, one big lie I could have handled, but Camille had sent a different version to every person coming to that dinner, which meant each of them would walk in with a completely different reason to be angry with me. I needed to simplify things. I called Darla back that evening and asked her to do one thing. Call Camille, keep it casual, and ask her to tell the same story she had told our uncle. Darla did it the next day, keeping the tone light, just 2 cousins catching up. Camille told her a story, but it was not the same story she had told our uncle. Not even close. Different details, different timing, different reasons for everything. It was like listening to someone describe a film they had never actually seen, and Darla recorded the whole call. Now I had something real. Proof that Camille was not just bending the truth. She was inventing it fresh each time depending on who she was talking to, and she could not even keep her own version straight. I added the recording to my folder. 2 days before the dinner, Salome called one final time. Her voice was flat and practiced. She said if I brought Julian to the dinner, she would ask him to leave. This is a family family matter, she said. He is not blood. He does not belong at that table. She was not keeping the peace. She was clearing the field. Julian was the one person in any room who would not let Camille rewrite what had happened without being challenged, and Salome knew it. The night before the dinner, a text came in from a number I did not recognize. No message, just a screenshot. I opened it and went still. It was a group chat. Camille, Salome, and 2 other relatives. Messages from that afternoon. Camille had laid the whole thing out like a stage direction. She would start by crying softly, talking about how alone she felt, and how her own sister had let her fall. Then Salome would step in and say this had gone on long enough, that I needed to apologize in front of everyone, and Julian needed to help with the debt. And if I refused or pushed back in any way, all 4 of them would stand up and walk out together. Every beat, every reaction, every exit had been rehearsed. I was supposed to walk in not knowing I was the only one without a script. I read through it 4 more times. Then I got up, went to the dining room table, laid out every piece of evidence one final time, verified the recording still played clean, put everything back in the folder, set it by the front door, and went to bed. Julian was already there with the light off. Neither of us said anything else. I was going. The room was fuller than Salome had told me to expect. 6 relatives on a random weeknight, every face carrying the same expression, like they had already been told something awful, and were waiting to hear me confirm it. Camille was sitting at the head of the table in the chair that was always Salome's, which told me everything about who was actually running this show. Her eyes were already red and puffy, prepped before I even stepped through the door. Salome stood and told me to sit down. We are going to settle this as a family. Before I was even settled in my chair, Camille began speaking in a voice just above a whisper, saying she only wanted to understand why her own sister would do this to her, saying she had given up everything because she believed she had a chance at something real, and I had let her fall. She looked at her hands the entire time, not at me, not at anyone. It was perfect. Every pause and tremble calibrated to exactly the right amount of sad without tipping into too much. 2 relatives across from me turned to look at me with pity, but not for me, for her. Salome stepped in right on cue and said Camille had lost her job, her savings, Sam, and all of it had started when I dangled that man in front of her. She said I owed Camille an apology, and I owed her help. I did not reach for my bag. I looked at Camille and said, "You are right, Camille. Tell me everything you want to say. I am listening." She blinked. Quick, double, and I caught it. She glanced at Salome for half a second, and Salome gave nothing back because neither of them had a script for this version. They had rehearsed for a fight. I settled back in my chair and let her keep going. She talked about how hard she had worked her whole life, how nothing ever came easy for her the way it came easy for me, how she had always had to fight for everything while I just smiled and received what I wanted. And then, because Camille never knew when she had won, she told the table about Sam. Her voice went up a little the way it always did when she was talking about herself. She said Sam had proposed to her twice, and she had turned him down both times because she knew she was worth more than what he could give her. She said it like she expected the room to nod. The uncle to her right shifted in his seat and asked quietly, "You turned down a man who loved you twice." Camille flicked her wrist and said Sam was fine, but he was never going to give her the life she was meant for. She was holding out for someone real. She said it with complete pride, not a trace of shame, and I watched the room change, one by one, like dominoes going over in slow motion. The uncle's face tightened. 2 relatives at the far end of the table exchanged a fast, sharp look. Even Salome pressed her lips together and looked down at the table for just a moment. Camille did not see any of it, because she never saw what was happening around her when she was talking about herself. She was too busy being right to notice that the room had stopped agreeing with her. Then she turned to me, the softness gone from her eyes, replaced by something that looked far more like the real Camille than anything she had shown since I walked through that door, and she said I had known Theo was not interested, and I had talked about him on purpose. I had wanted her to chase him so she would look stupid. I kept my voice level. I said, "Camille, I mentioned my husband's friend was visiting our lake house. That is all I said. You quit your job. You maxed your cards. You dumped Sam over the phone. Nobody told you to do any of that." Her hands curled into fists on the table. She said, "You set me up." There was nothing soft in her voice now. I asked her, quietly enough that the room leaned in, how? By mentioning a man existed. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched and the room felt it. Every person at that table watching Camille find no answer to a question with an obvious one. Salome stepped in and said this was not about blame. It was about helping her daughter. And Julian had plenty of money. That was my cue. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and laid the screenshots on the table in order. The text where Camille called Julian ordinary, said I did not deserve him, bragged about refusing to settle for Sam, demanded Julian pay off her cards. I looked around the table and said, she did not lose anything. She threw it all away because she thought she deserved better, and now she wants my husband to pay for it. Camille lunged for the papers, but the uncle got there first. He held the stack away from her and began reading, slowly, line by line, page by page, and I watched his face change with every passage. Nobody spoke while he read. The room stayed completely still except for the sound of paper moving in his hands. Then Darla spoke. She had been still the whole dinner, 3 chairs down, watching with a face that could have been carved from stone, and when her voice came out it was clear clear and steady. She said, "Camille, you told me you were kicked out of the lake house in the middle of the night. You told our uncle a completely different story. You told Salome another one. I asked you to tell me your version and it did not match any of them." She took out her phone, tapped the screen twice, and set it face up on the table with the speaker on. Camille's own voice came out of it, telling Darla a version of that summer that had nothing to do with what she had just told this table. Darla stopped the recording. Camille's face went blank. Every expression switched off at once. Salome's mouth opened and then closed again without a sound. The uncle set the papers down slowly and looked at Camille with something that was not anger and not pity, just tired. He said, "Camille, I think you should stop talking." The room waited for the tears. Camille always cried when she was cornered because crying had always worked, but she did not cry. She stood up, pushed back the chair she had taken from our mother, looked directly at me, and every trace of the wounded sister was gone. What was left was just the real Camille, the one I had grown up with, the one who had spent her whole life looking at what I had and deciding it should have been hers. She said, "You were never supposed to have any of this. Not Julian, not the house, not any of it. I was the one who was supposed to matter, and you stole it, and you know you did." The room did not move. Nobody breathed, and in that silence, every person at that table finally heard what I had been hearing for years. This had never been about 3 maxed credit cards. It had never been about Theo or the lake house or even Sam. Camille did not want money. She did not want help or an apology or a fresh start. She wanted to be me. She wanted the life Julian had chosen to give me, and she had never once been able to accept that she had not earned it, and I had. I stood up, picked up my folder, and said, "I did not steal anything, Camille. I just lived my life, and you were so busy watching mine that you forgot to live yours." I walked to the door. Salome said my name once, sharp, but her chair did not move and her footsteps did not follow. The uncle said nothing. As I passed Darla's chair, she caught my eye and gave a small nod. I went down the front steps to Julian's car at the curb, opened the door, and sat down. Julian looked at me and asked how it went. "She told the truth for the first time in her life," I said. "She just did not mean to." He put the car in drive without another word. The house stayed exactly where it was behind us.